It's not every day you see a top 10 Super GM get crushed in 22 moves, so fasten your seatbelts because we're in for a belter here. So this game was played between Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov with the black pieces. It was the Meltwater Tour Final 2021, and this is an Armageddon game. So Magnus with white has a bit more time, but he has to win to take the result. Shak only needs a draw and then he's fine. So we have this Queen's Gambit on the board, and now Shak plays this trendy sideline A6 move. You can try and head for these Queen's Gambit accepted lines with this. Whoops, that was meant to be b5. So that's why Magnus takes on d5 immediately. We have this pawn recapturing, and now he develops his bishop. He wants to play pawn to e3 to get the king side out, but first he wants this bishop outside the pawn chain. Now we had knight f6, pawn to e3, bishop to d6 here, good move, challenging that strong light squared bishop. And now Carlsen could capture here, that's not a bad move, but instead he plays bishop g5. Remember, he's trying to win, so he wants to keep tension in the position, pieces on the board. And it puts the question to black as to how they want to develop. You could drop back with the bishop to e7, and then you're spending a second move on the bishop. You want to play knight to d7 and bolster that knight, but then you block this bishop. And so that's why Shak goes bishop e6 first, getting that bishop out before he then plays knight b to d7. So we had bishop to d3 now, knight b to d7, and here Magnus goes for it, pushing for the win, pawn to f4. Always a double-edged move, because although you gain space and you're now threatening to trap this bishop and win it, you have weakened your king position along here or along here in future. This is now a backwards weak pawn, and if black ever consolidates and counterattacks, you could be in trouble. So Shak now has to respond to this threat of trapping the bishop. He can't just castle, for example. We've got f5. So there's a couple key ways in which he can do this. One is moving the bishop for a second time, hitting the queen here. You could play like this, but this isn't anything for white, because after this and this is just a level position. If anything, black's a bit for choice. So after bishop g4, you'd probably go knight f3, and okay, we play some chess. It's a different game. White's still a bit better. But instead, Shak plays in a really dynamic way here. So he plays pawn to h6. Magnus drops the bishop back to h4. You don't want to chop here and give black an easy life. And now a really dynamic move from Shak, pawn to g5. So he's giving up a pawn like this. After captures, captures, bishop captures, he's now a pawn down, but he has opened these lines here for his heavy pieces, and it has bought him some time because of these bishop moves. But here's the problem now for Shak. He plays in this dynamic way, and then he follows up with c6, which is just a bit lackluster. I would argue that maybe something like rook takes on h2 would have been better, although it maybe looks a bit dodgy that after takes, bishop takes, you're losing some time here with this bishop. What you can do now with black is after, say, knight f3 attacking the bishop, you check on g3, king to f1, and now pawn to c6. And the difference here is you won a pawn back, you've slightly misplaced the white king here to f1, and now, although white gets e4 and a big break in the centre, maybe Shak was worried about this, after queen b6, getting out of this pin, you do have some pressure here and here. You are soon going to castle queenside, and you can maybe generate something down the h-file later with your rook. So white's still a bit better because of this nice centre and the better minor pieces here, but black has more to play for. But how Shak played in the game, he goes pawn to c6 immediately, and the problem now is that Magnus gets this queen f3 move in. Great move. So because the knight hasn't come to f3 yet, the queen can develop there, and we can see the instant pressure that this puts on the f-file, and this knight in particular, which is pinned. And the problem for black now is it's just really hard to wiggle out of this. If you try bishop to g4, attacking that queen, well, you can actually just drop the queen back to f2 now, and you maintain all the pressure here. If you try rook to h5, then simply h4 maintains that bishop. So there's a lot of problems for black. And queen b6 can't solve things tactically either, because you don't take here as white, or then queen takes on b2 is actually good for black with counterplay. But actually you can just play knight g to e2. Now you don't mind dropping this pawn because rook to b1 is coming, and that knight is defended by this one. And in the meantime, white's just going to continue developing, castling queenside. Black still has problems here along this diagonal. So coming back here, that's why Shak tried to resolve these issues by playing bishop e7 after queen f3. But now Magnus just gets an awesome position. So he plays knight g to e2, a lovely square to develop that knight to, because it's coming to f4 now, where it's going to loom over the black position, looking at these sensitive points. Shak tries queen b6, desperate for counterplay, desperate to get castled queenside, but now castles queenside from Magnus, and look at the harmony in his position. So Shak goes for counterplay here with pawn to c5, but it's a really dodgy move. Better would have just been castles immediately. As a general rule of thumb, you don't want to be breaking open the centre when your own king is still staggering around the centre of the board. But Shak goes c5, and now Magnus plays really accurately. He plays bishop to c2, just tucking that bishop away so it's not running into c4, and also opening up the d line for the rook here, we note. Shak now castles queenside, but here we now have knight f4, and there's just too many weaknesses in the black position for black to hold everything together now. One of the big problems of this c5 break is that it weakened this d5 pawn, and that pawn's now in trouble. We can see that there's 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking it, and only 2 defenders, and one of those is under fire, of course, so lots of tactics at play. Now Shak goes bishop g4 here, so Magnus had to calculate this when he played knight e to f4, and here's his reply. So if you want to pause and have a look for it, then I'd encourage you to do so. It's a lovely move. He plays knight f takes on d5. You can take with either knight really, but the problem is black's whole centre is crumbling, and there's tactics here against the queen, which would be taken with check. So Shak's just not in time with any of his threats. He takes on d5 here. Just as a quick note, if he does take on f3 first, well, now we take here with check. Knight recaptures, pawn recaptures, and Magnus is not 1 but 2 pawns up with a completely won position. So Shak first tries taking the knight. Here he tries taking the knight. Magnus recaptures with his knight. Now Shak takes on f3. We have this in between move, Zwisch and Zug, check. Knight recaptures. Bishop takes on e7 now from Magnus, good move. So he attacks this rook, counter-attack against his own rook, which is being attacked. And again, this was absolutely the right way to play from Magnus. If we just jump back here, if he took this bishop first, well, now Shak takes here, and black is actually better because this pawn's under fire, the centre's collapsing basically, you're in some trouble as white. So Magnus correctly takes this bishop, and now Shak takes on d1, attacking that rook, and here we have the killer move from Magnus. If Magnus were to just take this rook immediately, well, now the bishop could take here. And after bishop takes on b6, that knight is hanging. We'd have bishop e4 to help that one escape. And the problem for white here is that now you're in an opposite coloured bishop endgame, which is notoriously drawish, especially when pawns are roughly even or just one pawn in it. So we could have pawn takes here, say bishop took here. Well, now Magnus is still 2 pawns up, but it's not always clear in these bishop endgames. Plus this one could be dropping soon. So coming back here, Magnus correctly sees that he shouldn't take that rook on d8 straight away. Instead, he plays bishop f5, check. And here Shak resigned. The game is completely gone, because if king b8, then we take the rook on d8. Now the rook has to recapture, or this knight drops. So rook takes on d1, and here you're just 2 clean pawns up, and you've got the better minor piece, and you've got an outside passed pawn, completely gone. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Magnus in action in the World Rapid and Blitz tournament coming up on the 26th of December. If you want to see all my coverage of those games, then do hit here to subscribe and never miss a video. And to see another amazing Carlsen game, click here. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.